There is a sense of desperation and hopelessness when it comes to a majority of workforce in India. A vast and dense country with over 1.3 billion population, a majority of the country cannot fulfill its needs and wants. In such circumstances, how can one even mention expectations and aspirations? There are several schemes of the central and state government that look at uplifting the weakest sections of the society, including women, rural, and unemployed, from the perspective of supporting their progress for a livelihood and decent living. But the schemes in themselves cannot be a solution, as both the citizens and the government have to wake up to a new paradigm of a digital society. The minute digital is mentioned, it conjures up the image of mobile applications. The real digital applications connect people across the planet in communities of interest and communities of practice to progress growth with inclusivity. Tej Singh is a vendor who sells artificial jewelry on the street.
Retail. Yes. Online होगा नहीं मेरे से पैसा ज़्यादा सही उसमें.
Chetan sells condiments.
ಬಿಸ್ನೆಸ್ ಇಂಪ್ರೂವ್ ಮಾಡಬೇಕು ಆನ್ಲೈನಲ್ಲಿ ಇನ್ನೂ ಮಾಡಿಲ್ಲ.
Mahadevamma sells fruits on the street. And so does Srinivasan, who sells peanuts.
விவசாயிகிட்ட போயிட்டு டைரெக்டாக போனாங்கன்னாக்க விவசாயிக்கும் 10 ரூபா பார்ப்பாரு, நாமளும் 10 ரூபா பார்க்குவோங்க.
Natraj is a watchman.
ಇದು ಒಂದು 10-15 ವರ್ಷದಿಂದ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀನಿ.
Saralamma sells fruits.
ಪ್ಲಾನ್ 5 ವರ್ಷ ಆದಮೇಲೆ ಇನ್ನೇನು ಮಾಡೋದು ಸ್ವಾಮಿ, ಇದೇ ತರಕಾರಿನೇ ಮಾಡ್ತೀವಿ.
Kempamma also sells flowers.
ಏನು ಮಾಡೋದು, ನಮಗೇನು ಹೊಲ ಇದೆಯಾ, ಮನೆ ಇದೆಯಾ, ಅವ್ರು ತಂದು ಕೊಡೋದ್ರಲ್ಲೇ ನಾವು ಇಸ್ಕೋಬೇಕು. ಅವ್ರು ಏನು ರೈಟ್ ಹೇಳ್ತಾರೆ ಆ ರೈಟಿಗೆ ತಂದು ನಾವು ಮಾರಬೇಕಪ್ಪ. ಅದು ಬಿಟ್ಟರೆ ನಮಗೆ ಬೇರೆ ಯಾವುದಿಲ್ಲ. ಮಾಮೂಲಿ ಮನೆ ಕೆಲಸಕ್ಕೆ ಹೋಗಬೇಕು ಅಂದರೆ ಗೊತ್ತಲ್ಲ, 2,000 3,000 ಕೊಡ್ತಾರೆ, 4-5 ವರ್ಷ ಮಾಡಬೇಕು. ಅದರಿಂದ ಇದೇ ಕೆಲಸನೇ, ಇದರಲ್ಲೇ ಮುಂದುವರ್ಸ್ಕೊಂಡು ಹೋಗಬೇಕು.
Gauramma is a cobbler.
ಅವಾಗೂ ಕೂಲಿ ಕೆಲಸ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೆ, ಮನೆಗೆ ಸಣ್ಣ ಪುಟ್ಟ ಮನೆ ಕೆಲಸ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಂಡಿದ್ದೆ. ಅವರು ಹೋದ್ಮೇಲೆ ಇದು ನಮ್ಮ ಜವಾಬ್ದಾರಿ ಅಂತ ನನಗೆ ಇನ್ನೂ 2 ಮಕ್ಕಳು ಓದ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ. ನಾನು ನಲಮಂಗಲ ಇರೋದು, ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಬಂದು ಡ್ಯೂಟಿ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀನಿ.
Bharat has a shop that sells trinkets and stationery. His apprentice, who is a 14-year-old, aspires to become an officer.
ಅಪ್ರೆಂಟಿಸ್ ಬಾಯ್. ಓಕೆ. ಏನಾಗಬೇಕು ಅಂತಿದ್ಯಾ? ಡ್ರೈವರಾ, ಮರ್ಡ್ರಾ, ಇಲ್ಲ ಅಂಗಡಿ ಇಡಬೇಕಾ, ಇಲ್ಲದೆ ಹೋದರೆ ಕೆಲ್ಸಕ್ಕೆ ಹೋಗ್ಬೇಕಾ ಅಂತ. ಆಫೀಸ್ ಅವರಾಗ ಯು ವಾಂಟ್ ಟು ಬಿಕಮ್ ಎ ಆಫೀಸರ್.
Amit Raj is an ambulance driver and a part-time auto driver.
ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಬ್ಯಾಂಗ್ಳೂರಲ್ಲಿ ಕಾಸ್ಟ್ ಆಫ್ ಲಿವಿಂಗ್ ಜಾಸ್ತಿ. ಸೊ ನಾನಿದು ಪರ್ಮನೆಂಟ್ ಜಾಬಾಗಿ ಇದು ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀನಿ. ಪಾರ್ಟ್ ಟೈಮಾಗಿ ನಾನು ಆಟೋ ಡ್ರೈವರ್ ಆಗಿದ್ದೀನಿ. ಆಟೋ ಡ್ರೈವರ್ 2000 ಇದ್ದೀನಿ ಇಲ್ಲಿ. 2000 ಇವತ್ತವರೆಗೂ ನನ್ನ ಸೇವಿಂಗ್ಸ್ ಅಂತ ಏನೂ ಮಾಡಿಲ್ಲ.
All of them have landed on their livelihoods by accident, not by design. They are grateful for their income, but it comes with a lot of hardship and sacrifices, and sometimes harassment at the hands of municipal authorities. They have no hope in growth or betterment in their livelihoods. What about human capital in their context? How can we leave them to their fate and only focus about the privileged in our societies? In this episode of The Future of Work with Subbu Iyer, we visit the campus of IIMB for a conversation with our featured guest, Professor Vasanthi Srinivasan. She has been teaching organizational behavior and human resource management for over 20 years. She has designed and delivered sessions on leadership development and career management on executive education programs. She was an Indian Council for Cultural Relations Chair Professor for Corporate Responsibility at the HHL Graduate School of Management, Leipzig, Germany. She has designed and delivered sessions on leadership development and career management. She was also a British Council visiting scholar at the International Centre for Corporate Social Responsibility at the Nottingham University Business School. Professor, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us.
Yeah, my pleasure, Subbu. Thank you.
Give me a little insight about what you teach at IIM. I want to slide in a quick question on that. What role or position does aspiration occupy in that teaching?
I think aspiration is dynamic. It evolves. Yeah. When I look at my journey over 20 years, right? Initially, my aspiration was to just be a good teacher, make that kind of an impact with generations of students. But somewhere along the way, you also realize that institutions like ours, in some ways, become exclusive.
Right.
Yeah? So which means in every batch I teach about 500 students, and for a country like ours where there are 5 million people equally competent outside, are we actually doing justice? Yeah? So in some ways at one level you could say, okay, you've reached your aspiration because you are in this best school in the country and you're teaching a wonderful set of students. And somewhere at that point in time you're asking, am I doing enough? And I think located in a country like India, where there are just problems everywhere, I think there is no end to aspiration. So then in 2015, we went on the digital with the edX platform. And that gave you a completely different opportunity to be able to reach a segment of people who will possibly never come to IIMB. Right. Never. And there I was able to build a course on people management, which till today is one of the top ranked courses in the world. Okay? And my greatest takeaway, I mean, in some way my biggest takeaway from this entire experience is the ability of digital to augment your capability to just reach out to hundreds and thousands of people that you would possibly never do personally as an individual. So today my aspiration really is, and since I chair the digital, I should tell you that, Subbu, that, I mean, how can we get the best of tech with the best of what people have to be able to make a difference to society? Yeah. I think that is what we should be thinking about. Tech by itself cannot do it.
Right.
Individuals like us without tech cannot do it. We'll possibly be able to touch a few thousands in our lifetime. But how do we bring these two to make a difference? Yeah. So in some ways, I think for us, aspiration in a country like India is limitless.
Aspiration is limitless anywhere, not just in India, because it is truly the potential of anything. Especially human potential. In our societies, we have tended to focus on the expectations, which is the performance.
Yeah.
There is a very typical misunderstanding about how do we bridge the series of performances or expectations with that, as you rightly called, the evolving aspiration. How do we see that changing definition and therefore the impact on human capital and future of work?
The former president of US, John Adams, who said, it takes a generation to go to war and politics, for the next generation to go to engineering and medicine, for the next generation to go to arts and humanities. Why is there so much of discussion on performance but not enough on potential? And the first and the most simple thing is performance is measurable, it's tangible, it's quantifiable. Potential is abstract, ambiguous, and intangible. Anything that is obvious, visible, and can be quantified is the easier way to go. Okay? Because it takes potential takes much longer to assess, and it's also got too much of volatility attached to it. So it's riskier for a person to be able to bet on the potential. What is it that drives performance? What is it that drives potential? It is the stage of evolution of the society itself, and we ought not to dismiss that. So, in a generation that has largely been driven by a poverty mindset, potential is about abundance. Yeah? Right. So, thinking abundance, believing there is abundance in a society that actually is poor is a really difficult one. And we ought not to also minimize the role of resources, provisioning of access to people who have the potential. So if access and resources are not available, potential cannot develop, however much as an individual I have aspirations.
Right.
So far, the problem has been these two, access and resources. One of the most marvelous things to human potential that we have seen is in the last Commonwealth Games. Yeah? Same set of people, just resources, just role models, just better teaching training, more motivated coaches, an ecosystem which supports their bare necessities. I mean, they don't get anything what they are entitled to and they should get in any country. But the fact that we were able to pull all of this together, we've been able to see potential manifest itself in ways that we have not seen earlier. I think that's a conversation that we often miss. Capital appreciates, resource depreciates. If the mindset is one of poverty, goes with it the mindset of extraction, goes with it the mindset of cost. So in that logic, human resource so far has been the dominant mindset, whether it is of corporations or of individuals. Yeah? What is it that will allow for me to build human capital? It's not about the intellect of the person. Human capital has a strong element of relational capital. It is at this intersection of the intellectual capital and the relational capital that human capital gets formed.
You use the term relational.
Yeah.
We use the term value. That relational is essentially value. Until and unless the value capital is defined,
Yeah.
the intellectual capital and the human capital cannot serve that relational value.
I realize over a period of time that our definition of expertise, there is a problem. We think an expert is someone who knows. What an irony.
Yeah.
What's the point in knowing if you don't know how to disseminate it to others? Because your expertise can only flower when I'm able to challenge what you're saying. Expertise is not about how much you know. A strong expertise of this kind, of how much you know, has to be equally blended with what they call as interactional expertise. The ability to present ideas, the ability to receive feedback, the ability to engage with what emerges, and the ability to reformulate. And I now have to go back and think. Unfortunately, we do great disservice to experts by labeling them as experts.
So that's a triad.
Yeah,
right?
correct.
And that triad is the engine, if you may, for growth.
Yes, absolutely.
Which, to every extent, no matter whether it is developed economies or developing economies, we have ignored that completely.
Absolutely, absolutely. If you have to create value, if you have to manage growth, if you have to create wealth, all the three of them require deep empathy.
Every single human has to learn a new way of life.
Absolutely.
This new way of life has no resemblance whatsoever to the past.
Absolutely. So everybody is talking about the hybrid workplace of the future. I don't think anybody has a clue what it's going to look like.
Right.
Because of COVID, we did virtual class, totally virtual. Then we did physical class, which we always did. And then we did hybrid online. Okay? So there are some students in the classroom, some students remotely. And it's kind of interesting that today my new normal is that this week I'm here today teaching in the afternoon in a physical class where I have all the students. Tomorrow morning I'm doing a completely virtual online class. The day after tomorrow I'm doing a hybrid class. Okay? And believe you me, these three formats of teaching on 3 consecutive days actually take their toll cognitively here. For a large number of us today, we engage with technology, but we don't know how to disengage from it.
Right.
We know we create efficiency through technology, but we don't know how to create effectiveness.
Right.
We know that we do meetings through technology, but we don't know how to collaborate through technology.
Right.
Yeah?
Right.
So it's kind of interesting that there are things I know, there are things I don't know. There are things that I thought I knew that worked for me in the past. There are things that I knew that did not work for me in the past. And suddenly I find that things that did not work for me in the past work very well in a hybrid, and I mean in a virtual environment, but they don't work well in a face-to-face environment, right? So it's interesting because the amount of reflection it calls on each one of us is significantly higher. I found myself reflecting so much more in the last 1 year than I have done previously. Human capital today is also this ability to reflect, ongoing, continuous, in the way you actually kind of create that value.
Human capital is not just in the middle class and the upper class. What about the disadvantaged ones? Somebody in the village who's a tailor. Why can't that tailor, have an aspiration to be able to stitch a gown on a 3D, 4D printing machine for a Sydney opera? Who will disseminate that digital skills to him or her? How are we making that impact?
Today, do we see a much greater appreciation of the fact that our education system and our skilling system are not in tandem? Second, how can we push skilling education institutes to really look at unemployment, innovation, and growth? I think for most of us there is pressure, which is that are we relevant? Are we doing a social impact? Okay, I think that's one part which is happening in the education system, which is why you're seeing almost even today in regional colleges, in colleges, small colleges, you can see actually innovation cell. I was on the board of advisors of one of the colleges, and they were saying, we started this 5 years ago because we wanted to improve in the ranking, the national ranking. But today you won't believe it, the local community is actually funding incubators. So to my mind, that is changing. How quickly, how do we want it to change? To how quickly is it happening? I think the gap is there. Capability, as you said, is translation of knowledge and skill in experience.
Right. The 8 to 18 and the 18 to 25, this is really the future of our workforce. Because these are the ones that are going to enter the portal of real work, as whether as a solopreneur, as an entrepreneur, as an entrepreneur. They are going to enter for the next 10 years, and they are going to make a significant impact of our workforces and workplaces. So then there is a 25 to 40, 40 to 60, and 60 plus baby boomers. They all have a role to play. Their role in this story as it is evolving is going to be more a support role, and they have to retool themselves.
One of my PhD students' thesis, we realized that as automation was happening in the shop floor, job losses were happening in the shop floor. The number of human machine reporting structure was changing. When he entered the field, there were 15 workmen supervised, and by the time he finished his study and walked out, there was one supervisor, 5 machines, 3 workmen. And in his thesis, what we found is that everybody is focused on what happens to the workmen who lost jobs. Very important, crucial. But for us, what was interesting is that the supervisor needed a completely new set of skills, and they honestly struggled. And the manager, who comfortably was managing shifts, suddenly found himself stressed, primarily because he now needed to manage data instead of people. And when all the three are changing, it's very difficult to talk about a future of work in isolation. Conceptualizing future of work. We are talking about the future of the worker and the future of the workplace. Yes. And like this young worker was telling my student, he said, earlier I would turn around, stretch and gossip. Today, I have machines on both sides. I have no one to talk to when I stretch. The workplace has changed. And most importantly, the fact is, future of work has impacted workplace, which has impacted the worker.
Right.
As a society, we are moving from a duty-based society to a rights-oriented society. The right-centered thinking is fundamental, because when I have a right, I can come and ask for it. As long as I have a duty centricity, somebody else will give. Somebody else has to take care of me. Whether it is in the behavior of older people, that we think we have to give advice to the young, and my students have taught me very clearly that they don't need advice.
Right.
They might need a tip occasionally on how to do it more effectively. They might need some insight from me. They might need a little bit of support from me, but they definitely do not need my advice.
Right.
And I think as parents, as older people in a society that reveres age, I think if we can just step back and say that people have to learn through their experiences, all that I can do is provide some insight, I think it will change in many, many ways. So, in a way, the rights perspective and the constitution, I think, is possibly going to be the biggest tool of change in the future. This whole idea of human agency, that I can act and I can think in my interest, I think that is something that we need to cultivate. Unless larger and larger number of people start reflecting and teach that quality very early, and reflection as a skill, not as something esoteric, I think that's another piece, that reflection as a skill is so critical, along with all the other skills, knowledge, competence, whatever it is. I think the ability to reflect and be self-aware, I think that's something that's going to be most crucial as we go forward. I should be able to work from home, I should be able to work from work. I should be able to work remote, I should also be able to work physical. I should be able to use technology, but yet I should know how to withdraw from technology. That's quite a big ask for anybody.
Digital provides you the ability to prepare a lesson plan based on the ability of a student to learn and be graded accordingly, so that the time that they spent in learning that can be effective. And everyone does not have to comprehend a topic in that 1 hour or 1.5 hour lecture. They can at their own rate of speed. Digital systems need to transform that. It is not the responsibility alone of the educator, not the imagination of just the student to be able to fit in. The communities of interest graduating to communities of practice, we don't see it.
I think I now see a lot more people, particularly in second tier, third tier cities, smaller towns, more ambitious than what they were maybe 10 years ago. And some of my own research shows that a lot more mothers are more ambitious for their daughters. Okay? So first one is that ambition is possibly where we need to invest a little bit more, even if it is self-centered. Yeah? The people who've already made it should possibly have aspiration. But I think everybody has to have an ambition, a dream, with access and opportunity to do what they can to the best of their ability to perform. Rural India is a little more other-centered. You still see communities, you still see interest groups of different kinds. And I think a lot of my work in the development sector also tells me that. Okay, so community building is possibly a little bit more easier than it is in urban India. Affluence brings self-centered behaviors.
True.
So how do you teach the affluent to be able to collaborate? There's a segment which has to learn to prioritize self-interest in terms of collective interest.
So how do you take that consumption to contribution is the biggest challenge of human capital.
Let's say that you mindfully, and in institutions like ours where we mindfully look at leadership development, okay, and we kind of Obviously, today there are just so many ways of being able to do it effectively. What I have found over the years is that if you have a group of 30 people, all of them in some performance measure at the same scale, my experience has been that there are at least 4 different pathways that these people will take when they go to excellence.
Yes.
Okay? So there is a desired state that I am told we need to move to. In all the work so far, I have found that that desired state is a objective state. But out of the 30, about 1/3 will reach somewhere on the desired state in the right direction. About 1/3 create new states that were not there in the definition. And there are 1/3, which is very interesting. They continue to excel where they are, but may not visibly move states. So maybe there is place for that 1/3 to continue to excel in what it does, with not all of them needing to move and grow to a state. So I would like to visualize what you were asking for this transformation. I'd like to visualize it as multiple pathways, equifinality, multiple paths to the same destination. And I think we ought to be comfortable with that there will be different ways, but the end goal might still be the same. I'm now beginning to see that as a society, if we can recognize that there is stability and there is growth,
Yes.
then such a move will mean that everybody, and this to my mind is human capital, which is the delta of where the person moves from wherever they started.
This has been a tremendously invigorating conversation. I'd like to come back and have more conversations.
Sure.
This is just a primer
Sure.
to where we go. Professor Vasanthi, thank you so much.
Thank you.
This has been a great experience for us.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks.
Hi friends, good to be back to see you again in the second episode of The Future of Work with Subbu Iyer. Last week, the nation of India celebrated the Ganesh Chaturthi. Lord Ganesha is known as the Lord of Wisdom. And I have published a story in the LinkedIn about Lord Ganesha and Ganesh Chaturthi. You will find the link in the description. The topic that we are discussing is about human capital management. And we need to understand this term called capital. Capital is the sum invested in growth. And growth in our societies today needs to be exponential, not just incremental. And humans are that engine for that growth. The triad of human, intellectual, and value capital, one cascading into another, is what will impact growth in our societies. At the very core of human capital management is this term, capability. It is a dual term. The capacity to transform and the ability to perform. The capacity to transform is a mindset. It is an aspirational state that propels human potential for performance. So while we have been obsessing all this time about performance, it is now time to cross the chasm from performance to potential. Skills or the abilities, on the other hand, is purely meant for performance or execution. The question that we have to ask ourselves is, what skills and to what relevance? The digital is changing everything for everyone on this planet. So the skills that we have until this point of time are actually irrelevant for the future. So therefore, the first step in being able to regenerate human capital is to create that transformation. The transformation of minds to be able to understand the future. When you understand the future, its composition, you then understand the skills that are required for it. These skills are not just a patchwork, but rather completely new skills that will challenge us, that will overwhelm us. and therefore is not something you click a finger and you transform the next day. It is going to be a process. There are no subject matter experts about the future. There are only learners. And learning is a process that we all have different rates, that we have different abilities to be able to absorb. And this rate of learning has to be a couple of steps ahead of the pace of transformation that we see around us. It is time we asked ourselves three very essential questions. Do we want to continue extracting and exploiting in place of enabling and empowering? Do we want to see the capacity to transform and the ability to perform mutually inclusively? Should we continue to see humans as appendages to work or the very engine of growth? Thank you again for being a subscriber. If you haven't yet subscribed, please follow us on any of your favorite channels that are listed. We would like to hear from you, immersively participating in this process. So please do write to fow@giggr.app. In my next episode, the topic is innovation, and my featured guest is Dr. Prabhu Rajagopal. I'm looking forward to meeting you once again. #Tuesdays at 5.